Before you do anything else right now, take a moment to glide your fingers along the side of your neck. Move slowly and search for minor, soft protrusions, particularly those that might catch on a shirt collar or tangle with a necklace. You might discover just one, or perhaps half a dozen are present. There could even be a tiny cluster nestled right beneath your jawline where your skin folds. These bumps have likely been there for years, causing you to eventually stop paying them any mind. Somewhere down the line, a person almost certainly assured you they were inconsequential, chalking them up to advanced age, standard skin changes, or just the natural progression of life past 50. Tonight, I intend to offer you an entirely different perspective, and I ask that you stick with me as I demonstrate why, because this is far from a trivial matter. Those soft little growths on your neck do not signify a simple dermatological issue. Rather, they serve as a direct communication. This specific message is not originating from your outer layers, but is coming from a deeper, much quieter place that typically remains silent until it has been disregarded for an extended period. To clarify what I mean by a message, your physical body rarely manifests a random symptom out of thin air. Any given symptom represents the observable conclusion of a physiological sequence. You only perceive the final link of that sequence on the surface where it can be felt, leading you to believe that is exactly where the issue originates. Consequently, you focus your efforts entirely on treating the surface. You visit a professional to have them snipped off, purchase over-the-counter elimination kits from the local pharmacy, or tie them off with sewing thread just like your relatives used to do. For a brief period, the specific area of your neck becomes smooth once more. Soon after, however, those growths return, or entirely new ones emerge a few inches away. They might even begin appearing in your armpits, on your eyelids, or within the warm folds beneath your chest. You address the surface yet again, while the underlying sequence, the true physiological driver, continues to operate completely unhindered. I want to state this clearly because you might have felt a bit foolish regarding this cycle. You absolutely did nothing wrong, as no one provided you with a proper guide. When an issue on your outer layer continuously reappears, attempting to treat that outer layer is the most logical reaction imaginable. It is precisely what the vast majority of people choose to do. The reason this strategy fails is not due to a lack of effort on your part, but rather because the guidance you received was incomplete. You were merely shown the final link and led to believe it represented the entire sequence. Tonight, I want to present you with the rest of the picture. I am going to guide you backward along that physiological sequence tonight, taking it one single link at a time. Our starting point will be your outer layer, where you initially assume the issue resides, and we will trace it back step by step until we reach the actual point of origin. To be completely candid with you, most standard medical consultations do not afford patients the necessary duration for this kind of exploration. There simply is not enough time to map out a biological sequence during a brief 15-minute checkup. Allow me to provide you with that time right now. Let us begin with the physical growth itself to understand what it truly is.
The official medical designation is an acrocordon. That is merely the formal clinical term for a common skin tag, which is a soft minor growth suspended from the body by a slender stalk. When viewed under a microscope, its composition is not mysterious in the slightest. It consists of a tiny core of loose collagen, which is the exact same structural protein that gives your flesh its firmness. This core is enveloped by a thin layer of standard surface cells, with a few microscopic blood vessels woven throughout to provide nourishment. That comprises the entire structure, possessing no independent nervous architecture and generally presenting zero inherent danger. The overwhelming majority of these growths are entirely benign to the touch and carry no risk of transforming into something malignant. If they are completely benign, you might wonder why I am urging you to dedicate your attention to them. The answer lies in their specific locations and the sheer volume at which they emerge. Those two distinct elements represent the initial two links in our biological sequence. Consider exactly where you discovered yours, whether on the neck, the armpits, the eyelids, the groin, or the folds beneath the breasts. A distinct anatomical pattern exists here, and this arrangement is by no means a random occurrence. These specific regions are where surface layers rub against one another, remaining warm, slightly humid, and subject to friction with every physical movement. Medical professionals refer to these zones as intertriginous areas, which is simply a complex term for places where two bodily surfaces meet and experience friction. Skin tags thrive remarkably well in these exact environments. Therefore, physical friction is undeniably a component of the overarching story. For an extended duration, friction was considered the entire explanation. Individuals were repeatedly informed that genetics combined with surface rubbing accounted for the issue, and you can still encounter this narrative today. This explanation is not technically incorrect, but it remains severely incomplete. Here is the fundamental question that friction alone cannot resolve. Imagine you and your neighbor are identical in age, and you both possess necks, collars, necklaces, and skin that naturally folds when turning your head. The physical friction experienced by both of you is virtually identical. Why is it then that one of you might have two minor tags that go completely unnoticed, while the other develops 30 clustered growths that multiply annually? Friction successfully explains the precise location of their growth, but it fails to explain why certain individuals produce a massive abundance of them while others develop almost none. To uncover that answer, you must trace the sequence back another link, moving away from the outer layer entirely to ask a different question. Instead of asking why they appear in a specific spot, we must determine what is signaling the tissue to proliferate in the first place. Think of it in this manner: friction merely represents the agricultural soil. It acts as the warm, damp corner of a garden where a seed will readily germinate if one happens to land there. However, soil on its own cannot grow anything without external inputs. Something must actively nourish that environment, and something must signal the organisms to multiply. That specific catalyst represents the subsequent link in our sequence. If this explanation is beginning to connect dots you have pondered for years, consider sharing it with someone dealing with similar issues. That is genuinely how this channel expands, addressing one person at a time. This brings us to the point where we leave the surface layer behind entirely. The element feeding the soil and commanding the tissue to grow is a hormone. It is a chemical messenger whose name you already recognize, even if you have only ever considered it in the context of blood sugar management. That hormone is insulin. You likely recognize insulin primarily as the regulator of blood glucose. When you consume food, your blood sugar rises, prompting your pancreas to secrete insulin, which acts as a key allowing glucose to exit the bloodstream and enter your cells for energy production. That is the universally understood responsibility, opening the cellular doors to let glucose enter. However, insulin possesses a secondary characteristic that is rarely discussed. At its core, insulin also functions as a potent growth hormone. It operates as a biological signal that commands the body to construct, store, and generate more tissue. When insulin is highly prevalent, your body interprets its presence as a sign of prosperity, indicating resources are abundant and growth should proceed. Here is the crucial detail regarding your neck. Insulin does not exclusively communicate with cells responsible for processing carbohydrates. It can also readily access your surface tissue and deliver that identical directive to expand and build. This is the exact analogy I want you to remember for the rest of our discussion because it makes the entire biological sequence perfectly clear. High concentrations of insulin behave very similarly to agricultural fertilizer. The defining characteristic of fertilizer is that it lacks the capacity to judge what you actually want to grow. If you scatter an excessive amount of it across your lawn, you do not simply achieve a healthier turf. Instead, weeds begin erupting through the fractures in your driveway. Plants start pushing up in neglected corners where you never intended to cultivate a single seed. Fertilizer does not request authorization. It simply commands every living thing within its reach to grow. That is precisely what an influx of insulin accomplishes within the friction zones of your neck. The soil is completely prepared by the warmth, the rubbing, and the natural folds of tissue, and suddenly a flood of fertilizer pours over it. Consequently, the tissue responds precisely to the chemical signal it receives, generating a soft tag here and another one there. As long as that fertilizer continues to flood the system, new growths will persist alongside it. This concept is backed by a distinct, measurable biological fingerprint. When researchers gathered skin tag tissue to examine it under a microscope against normal skin samples, they discovered something highly specific. The tag tissue exhibited significantly elevated levels of cellular receptors for a close relative of insulin known as insulin-like growth factor. This is a growth signal that elevates in tandem with insulin levels. The growths were not merely existing in highly fertile soil, they were covered in extracellular antennae designed specifically to capture that exact growth signal. The tissue itself was structurally optimized to listen for that message. Now you have uncovered the third link, and it is an incredibly significant one. These growths are expanding because a chemical command is forcing them to do so, driven by insulin acting as a potent fertilizer. This realization leads us directly to the only question that truly matters at this stage. Why is there such an overabundance of insulin present in your system in the first place? This specific link is where our narrative transitions from a localized skin issue into a comprehensive whole-body discussion. I ask that you stay focused here, as this concept represents the absolute core of the matter. Recall that insulin's primary responsibility is acting as the key that unlocks the door for blood sugar to enter your cells. Now imagine that over the course of many years, the locks on those cellular doors gradually begin to stiffen. The key still fits inside the mechanism, but it no longer turns with ease. Your cells become somewhat unresponsive to the knock of insulin. The formal medical term for this physiological state is insulin resistance. It simply indicates that your cellular structures have stopped responding effectively to the signals sent by insulin. What course of action does your body take when its cells refuse to answer? It does not simply give up, instead it becomes significantly louder. Your pancreas detects that glucose is failing to exit the bloodstream at the proper rate, so it responds by pumping out increasingly massive quantities of insulin. Picture yourself attempting to shout a name across a highly chaotic, noisy room. The first time you call out, a few heads might turn, but if your target fails to respond, you do not lower your voice to a whisper. You shout much louder, repeating the name over and over until your voice dominates the entire space. That is precisely how your pancreas behaves. Because the cells are failing to listen, it floods your bloodstream with insulin, attempting to force those cellular doors open through sheer chemical volume. You might be wondering why these cellular locks begin to stiffen in the first place. It is rarely the result of a single dramatic health event. Rather, it stems from the slow accumulation of completely ordinary daily habits. This includes years of consuming meals centered around rapidly digesting starches and sugars, each demanding a sharp, intense burst of insulin. It involves extended periods of sedentary behavior where the muscles meant to absorb glucose sit completely idle instead. Additionally, carrying extra weight around the midsection plays a role. As abdominal fat does not merely store energy, it actively secretes its own chemical signals that render cells even harder of hearing. Finally, simple aging contributes to the process, as the human body naturally becomes a bit less forgiving with each passing decade. None of these variables acts as an isolated trigger on its own. Together over many years, however, they gradually wear down the cellular locks. If you have been quietly blaming yourself for this condition, I urge you to stop immediately. This is not a moral failing or a lack of discipline. It is a slow, incredibly common mechanical shift within the body. The encouraging aspect of a mechanical issue is that what drifts slowly in one direction can be gradually guided back in the opposite direction. Yet there is a quiet tragedy embedded within this sequence, which is the exact element that connects all the pieces. For an extended duration, often spanning several years, this compensatory mechanism actually functions successfully. The pancreas shouts loudly enough that the blood sugar is eventually forced into the cells, keeping your circulating glucose levels looking perfectly normal on standard lab tests. You visit your practitioner for a routine checkup. They perform a basic finger prick or run a fasting glucose panel, and the results return within the ideal range. You are explicitly told that your health is perfectly fine. In the narrow context of that isolated number, you technically are. However, look at the intense struggle occurring beneath the surface. Your blood sugar remains normal exclusively because your insulin levels are astronomically high, working brutal overtime hours to maintain that equilibrium. The room appears quiet only because someone is screaming at the top of their lungs. All of that excess insulin, that constant flood of fertilizers saturating your system day after day, must ultimately go somewhere and exert an effect. It eventually reaches the friction zones of your skin, where it diligently cultivates those tags. Do you comprehend the profound implication of this sequence? The growths on your neck can manifest years before a standard blood sugar test ever registers an abnormal reading. They represent one of the very few outward physical indicators of elevated insulin that you can actually visualize and touch at a time when every standard lab value still appears entirely reassuring. They are the early smoke signaling a fire in a room you have not bothered to check yet. Let us formally identify the root cause of this entire sequence, as we have finally reached it. The root cause is not located in your skin, nor is it strictly your blood sugar levels in the manner you have traditionally been taught to measure them. The true root is insulin resistance, a slow, silent stiffening of the cellular locks that has been progressing for years while your pancreas works increasingly harder behind the scenes to keep your superficial numbers looking serene. All the while, your neck has been attempting to communicate this to you politely and quietly, one small growth at a time. This is the conceptual reframe I promised you at the absolute beginning of our discussion. You initially believed you were dealing with a localized skin issue, so you focused your treatment entirely on the skin. In reality, the growths themselves were never the actual problem. They were merely the receipt. They are the printed record documenting years of metabolic overspending, serving as tangible proof of how hard your body has been working while no one was paying attention. If you simply snip off the receipt, the underlying financial spending continues unhindered. The sole method for slowing the formation of new growths is to directly address the metabolic account they are being billed to.
Visualize an iceberg for a brief moment. The portion you can readily observe, the tags resting above the waterline on your neck, represents nothing more than the tiny, visible tip. It creates the illusion of being the entire structure. However, the massive bulk that truly matters and dictates the entire situation rests far beneath the surface where it remains completely hidden from view. That hidden mass represents your circulating insulin, your years of underlying resistance, and the silent labor your pancreas has been performing. People frequently spend an entire lifetime chipping away at the visible tip, wondering why it never seems to diminish in size. It never shrinks because the tip does not constitute the actual iceberg. It is merely the portion that happens to be exposed to the elements. There is one additional physical sign that frequently accompanies these growths, and I want you to be fully aware of it because it carries the exact same message. Examine the skin of your neck once more, looking closely at the back, the sides, and within your armpits. If, alongside the tags, you spot areas where the skin appears noticeably darker, thicker, and almost velvety, resembling a smudge of dirt that refuses to wash away, pay close attention. The clinical term for this condition is acanthosis nigricans, which is simply the formal medical designation for those dark, velvety patches of tissue. It stands as one of the most widely recognized dermatological indicators of elevated insulin, very frequently manifesting in the exact same individuals and the identical anatomical zones as the skin tags. The growths and those velvety patches are essentially two distinct messengers delivering the exact same letter. Here is a simple action you can take tonight in the comfort of your own bathroom using excellent lighting and a mirror. This is not a diagnostic test, but rather an honest, objective self-examination. Take the time to actually count the individual tags on your neck and note exactly where the clusters are situated. Next, inspect the other friction zones under your arms, on your eyelids, and within any folds where skin meets skin. While you are conducting this check, look for any of those velvety, darker patches along the back and sides of your neck. You are not attempting to diagnose a medical condition here. You are simply establishing a personal baseline. The reason this practice is immensely helpful is that a month from now, after you implement the straightforward strategies I am about to share, you will have a clear point of comparison. You will be able to easily discern whether fresh growths are still arriving or if your skin has finally gone quiet. Your own neck effectively transforms into the most honest, accurate progress report you could ever obtain, and it costs absolutely nothing to read. At this stage, I must pause and be completely explicit about a crucial point, because safety and proper care matter more than anything else I will share tonight. Everything I have detailed so far, the soft, flesh-colored, painless growth resting on its tiny stalk, constitutes the ordinary, completely benign variety. However, not every single bump on your body is a standard skin tag, and a few specific warning signs mean you should consult a clinician promptly rather than waiting.
If a growth on your body begins to bleed spontaneously without being scratched or caught on clothing, you need to have it checked. The same applies if it exhibits rapid growth, changes color by turning black, red, or a mixture of shades, or becomes painful and itches persistently. Furthermore, if it develops an irregular asymmetrical shape or if a single spot simply looks completely different from all the surrounding ones, you must schedule an appointment. Do not make assumptions. While a genuine skin tag is entirely harmless, other dermatological conditions can easily disguise themselves as one, and some of those require a trained professional eye to identify. Additionally, please refrain from attempting to cut, tie off, or burn these growths off at home under any circumstances. Commercial pharmacy removal kits, along with home methods involving thread or scissors, can easily trigger significant bleeding, dangerous infections, and permanent scarring. Moreover, if the growth turns out to be something other than a simple tag, you have now disrupted the tissue and compromised the opportunity for a clinician to examine it properly. Removal, when desired, is a remarkably swift and minor procedure in the hands of a professional, so please leave it to them. There is a secondary, highly encouraging reason to seek a professional evaluation. A sudden, rapid proliferation of new skin tags, particularly when paired with those dark, velvety patches, provides an excellent reason to request a comprehensive look at your overall metabolism. This means moving beyond a basic fasting blood sugar test to have an open conversation about insulin levels and your hemoglobin A1C. This specific blood test reflects your average blood sugar regulation over the preceding 2 to 3 months, illustrating exactly where you stand on the spectrum leading toward diabetes. You are fully empowered to initiate this discussion yourself. You can simply state to your provider that you have noticed an increase in these growths, understand they can be linked to insulin levels, and would like to run the appropriate tests. That single sentence has guided countless individuals onto a significantly healthier path years earlier than they would have otherwise discovered it. Furthermore, there is one absolute rule that remains steadfast throughout everything we discuss. If you are currently taking any prescribed medication, particularly for blood sugar or blood pressure, never alter your dosage or discontinue it on your own. Anything we explore tonight is intended to serve as a conversation starter for you and your prescribing clinician, never a replacement for their direct medical oversight. This brings us directly to the practical information you have been anticipating. If the root cause of the issue is underlying insulin resistance, and the biological fertilizer is an overabundance of insulin secreted by an overworked pancreas, then your true objective is not to battle your outer skin layer. Instead, the real goal is to assist your cells in regaining their sensitivity to insulin so your pancreas can finally reduce its high-volume output. When circulating insulin levels decrease, that metabolic fertilizer naturally thins out. As that fertilizer diminishes, the chemical signal instructing your skin to expand becomes progressively quieter. None of the strategies required to achieve this are exotic, none of them demand significant financial expenditure, and every single one is firmly backed by scientific research. Allow me to present them to you in the precise order of their practical impact. First, and this represents the simplest yet most remarkably potent strategy available, make it a point to move your body immediately after consuming a meal. This does not require a strenuous workout or a trip to the gym. A simple walk is completely sufficient. This is one of my absolute favorite scientific findings because it requires so little effort from you. In a study published within the journal Scientific Reports, researchers discovered that a brief 10-minute walk taken immediately following a meal significantly reduced the subsequent peak spike in blood sugar. They noted that initiating the walk right away rather than delaying it was the critical factor determining its effectiveness. Additional research has demonstrated that even a remarkably brief walk of just 2 to 5 minutes post-meal can effectively blunt the blood sugar curve, with the primary benefits manifesting within the 60 to 90-minute window after eating. Consider the profound impact of that mechanism. The single largest blood sugar surge of your entire day typically transpires right after you consume your largest meal. If you simply stand up and walk for a mere 5 or 10 minutes instead of immediately sitting down in front of a television screen, you dramatically flatten that glucose spike. Less sugar surging through your vessels means your pancreas does not need to shout with insulin. If you implement this practice after every meal possible, you are effectively turning down the volume of that metabolic fertilizer 3 times a day. Why does walking produce such a direct and powerful effect on this system? It works because your skeletal muscles serve as the absolute largest storage reservoir for glucose within your body, and a contracting muscle is fully capable of pulling sugars straight out of your bloodstream without requiring much insulin at all. When you walk, your leg muscles essentially open a spatial side door for glucose that functions independently of insulin's key. That is precisely why it delivers results within mere minutes. You are no longer forced to wait on the stiff, unresponsive locks of the primary doors. You are utilizing an entirely different entryway. Second, focus on building and preserving your existing muscle mass, which represents the essential long-term strategy supporting your post-meal walks. Muscle tissue is incredibly hungry from a metabolic standpoint. The greater the amount of muscle mass you carry, the more glucose your body can seamlessly absorb and store, which directly helps your cells remain highly sensitive to insulin signals. Past the age of 50, muscle mass quietly begins to waste away unless you consistently provide your body with a compelling structural reason to retain it. Therefore, give it that reason regularly. You do not need to lift heavy barbells to achieve this. Simple daily movements can be highly effective. This includes standing up from a chair a few times in a row without relying on your hands for assistance, carrying your own heavy grocery bags, or rising up onto your tiptoes while waiting for your morning kettle to boil. Consistent, gentle resistance training signals your physiology to firmly hold on to the muscle tissue it currently possesses. Be sure to consult with your clinician regarding what specific movements are safe for you, particularly if your knees, hips, or cardiovascular health require special consideration. The core principle remains simple: more muscle leads to calmer insulin. Third, deliberately adjust the structural composition of your plate rather than focusing strictly on reducing the portion size. You do not need to follow a flawless diet. You simply need to alter which specific nutrients enter your bloodstream first. When a meal consists predominantly of rapidly digesting starches and simple sugars, such as white bread, white rice, sweetened beverages, or pastries, it floods your system rapidly and demands a massive, forceful shout of insulin. Conversely, when you deliberately pair those carbohydrates with fiber, protein, and healthy fats, the exact same meal is absorbed slowly. It enters your system like water gently soaking into fertile ground rather than rushing off it as turbulent runoff, which beautifully flattens the subsequent insulin spike. Therefore, make it a habit to lead your meals with vegetables and proteins, consuming them first and saving the bread or starch for the very end. Additionally, swap out sugary beverages for plain water or unsweetened tea, as liquid sugar triggers the fastest, sharpest glucose spikes of all due to the complete lack of structural nutrients to slow its absorption. These represent minor, manageable swaps implemented daily, yet they ease the chronic demands placed on your pancreas far more effectively than any dramatic, unsustainable diet ever could. Fourth, and this particular strategy frequently catches people completely off guard, make a concerted effort to protect the quality of your sleep. Experiencing a series of short, fragmented nights directly causes your cells to become significantly more resistant to insulin all on its own, even if absolutely nothing else changes in your daily routine. Your physiology interprets chronic physical exhaustion as a form of biological stress, and stress naturally elevates blood sugar while further stiffening those cellular locks. You can execute everything perfectly at the dinner table, yet completely undo a portion of that progress with a week of 4-hour nights. Consequently, you must treat your sleep as a core component of your metabolic protocol rather than something separate from it. Prioritize resting in a cooler, darker room, maintaining a consistent bedtime, and reducing exposure to screen light during the final hour of the evening. Doing so is not an act of luxury or indulgence, it is fundamental metabolic maintenance. Let us add a fifth strategy, as it is arguably the easiest of all to implement, yet the vast majority of people entirely overlook it. Consciously break up extended stretches of sedentary sitting. Your metabolic health is not solely determined by the total amount of exercise you accumulate in a single day. It is heavily influenced by how long you remain completely motionless without a break. Spending hours continuously anchored to a chair causes your muscles to go completely quiet, and dormant muscle tissue stops actively clearing glucose from your bloodstream. To counter this, establish a loose, natural rhythm throughout your day. Every half hour or so, make it a point to stand up, take a brief walk to the window, or refill your water glass. Spending just 2 minutes on your feet repeatedly throughout the day keeps that metabolic side door for glucose propped wide open. You are not attempting to physically exhaust yourself with this habit. You are simply refusing to remain completely static for hours on end. Let us make the structural adjustment of your plate concrete, as the advice to alter its shape can sometimes sound a bit abstract. Visualize a standard dinner presentation. Instead of automatically leading with the bread roll or the mashed potatoes, deliberately begin your meal by eating the vegetables and the protein source. Consume the salad, the fish, the chicken, or the beans first, and do so slowly. By the time you finally reach the starchy portion of your meal, your stomach is already partially filled, and the previously consumed nutrients are present within your digestive tract to significantly slow down the absorption of those carbohydrates. It is the exact same food on the identical plate, consumed in a slightly different sequence, resulting in a noticeably gentler, kinder rise in your circulating blood sugar. That embodies the entire strategy. You are not giving up the foods you enjoy, you are simply ensuring they arrive last. Now I want to be completely candid with you regarding what you should realistically expect, because honesty is the absolute foundation of this channel, and I wish to spare you from false promises. The skin tags that have already formed on your body will most likely not spontaneously fall off on their own, simply because your insulin sensitivity improves, and I will not pretend otherwise. You cannot unbake a cake once it has been mixed and heated. The growths that currently exist are structurally established. If you desire to have them removed, that requires a swift routine visit to a qualified clinician. The true prize of this metabolic shift, and what fundamentally changes, is a dramatic reduction in the rate at which entirely new growths manifest. That is the exact outcome you are pursuing, not rewriting the past, but successfully slowing down the future. Allow me to outline the general timeline in which these physiological shifts typically tend to occur. Within the first week or two, you will likely detect the initial changes in how you physically feel rather than how you look. You will begin experiencing far steadier energy levels following your meals, noticing a significant reduction in those heavy, sleepy crashes that typically hit an hour after lunch. That familiar afternoon slump will begin to soften, which serves as clear evidence that your blood sugar curve is flattening and stands as the earliest felt indicator that your cellular locks are loosening. Over the subsequent weeks and months, as you maintain consistency with your post-meal walks, muscle preservation, and structured plate adjustments, your deeper metabolic values will begin to shift. Specifically, your average blood sugar over time, your hemoglobin A1C, can begin to gradually drift downward. This process is inherently slower, measured in months rather than days, because it reflects a long-term biological average. Somewhere within that identical time frame, Many individuals notice the simplest, most rewarding change of all. They simply stop discovering new growths on their bodies. Their neck entirely stops surprising them with fresh additions, and there are no longer any new tags snagging uncomfortably on a shirt collar. The proliferation effectively grinds to a halt. That defines the true trajectory of this journey, feeling physically better within a matter of days, shifting your laboratory markers over a span of months, and halting the formation of new growths across the changing seasons. It is not an instantaneous overnight cure, but rather a profound shift in your overall health direction.
Before we bring our discussion to a close, I want to ask you a question, and I do so for a highly practical reason rather than simple small talk. Please share your current age with me in the comment section below. Are you currently navigating your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, or beyond? I ask because this biological sequence does not behave identically across every stage of life. Past the age of 70, certain physiological signals begin to shift, and the balance of what matters most for your metabolism moves along with them. Consequently, I genuinely want to understand who is watching from the other side of this screen, as it directly shapes what I research and who I create content for next. This brings us back to our conclusion, right back to your neck where we initially began, though you are undoubtedly viewing it through a completely different lens now. Those small, soft growths were never a localized skin defect. They were the observable conclusion of a long, silent, physiological sequence running from your outer layer, through your friction zones, straight back to a flood of circulating insulin, and ultimately to cells that stopped listening years ago. The physical growth acts as the receipt, the insulin serves as the fertilizer, and the underlying resistance represents the true root cause. The message your neck has been patiently carrying all this time was never that you are simply growing old. It was an urgent plea to look deeper while you still possess the opportunity to alter your course. You have the power to shift this trajectory, not by utilizing a superficial home removal kit, but by taking a brief walk after your dinners, building a little more muscle mass, structuring your meals in a wiser sequence, and prioritizing a full night of deep sleep. These minor, consistent actions performed in the correct direction accumulate massive results over time. Go ahead and run your fingers along your neck one more time right now, because you finally comprehend exactly what those growths have been trying to communicate. If anything we explored tonight caused you worry, such as a growth that bleeds, expands rapidly, changes color, or a sudden, massive influx of new tags, remember that is not a reason for panic. Rather, it is a clear indicator to schedule a calm, straightforward appointment with a medical professional. Bring the insights you gained tonight and ask the appropriate questions, as initiating that vital conversation is entirely within your hands. Focus your efforts on caring for the root cause beneath the surface, and the outer surface will naturally tend to follow. I look forward to seeing you in our next discussion. This content is produced strictly for general educational purposes and does not constitute medical advice, formal diagnosis, or professional treatment. It cannot account for your personal medical history, specific health status, or current medications. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional, BFO,